You have been making choices your entire life that were never actually yours. And the terrifying part is that you had absolutely no idea. Not even once. Every morning you woke up and felt that invisible weight on your chest, that low hum of anxiety you could never quite explain, that pull toward the safe option, the familiar road, the path of least resistance. You probably called it caution. You probably called it wisdom. But what if I told you it had nothing to do with wisdom at all? What if that weight, that hum, that pull was something far older than you? Something that was already running inside you the moment you took your first breath. Something that has been quietly making your decisions for you ever since. I know that sounds like the opening line of a thriller, but stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is not fiction. It is the most real thing most people will ever refuse to look at directly. There is a part of your brain that does not know what year it is. It does not know about your career goals, your relationships, your dreams, or the life you are trying to build. It does not care about any of that. It only knows one thing with absolute certainty: whether you are safe right now, in this exact second. And it will do anything, sacrifice anything, destroy anything to keep you in the zone it defines as safe. Not happy, not fulfilled, not alive in the way that actually counts. Just safe, just still, just small enough to survive. Most people go their entire lives never knowing this thing exists. They just feel its effects. The job they never quit, even though it drained them dry. The relationship they stayed in 3 years too long because leaving felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The business idea they carried around for a decade, always 1 month away from starting, always finding a perfectly logical reason to wait. They called it being realistic. They called it being responsible. And all the while, this ancient, wordless program inside them was running the show, pulling levers they could not see, steering them away from everything that felt uncertain, which, when you think about it, is everything worth having. I want you to really sit with that for a second. Think about the last time you did not do something you deeply wanted to do. Not because of a practical obstacle, but because of a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a quiet voice that said, "Not yet, not now. What if it goes wrong?" That feeling had a source, and that source is what we are going to talk about today, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, your entire life starts to shift. Friends, if this is already making you think, please subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps this reach more people who need to hear it. Now here is where it gets interesting. Because to understand why this program exists inside you, I have to take you somewhere unexpected. Not to a therapist's office, not to a self-help book. I have to take you back to a version of human existence so raw and so stripped down that comfort, as we know it today, simply did not exist. Imagine waking up and not knowing if you would eat that day. Not knowing if the sound outside your shelter was wind or something that wanted to end your life. Imagine a world where every unfamiliar thing, every new face, every unknown territory carried a genuine possibility of death. In that world, the brain that kept you alive was not the one that took risks and chased dreams. It was the one that froze first and asked questions never. The one that pulled you back before you even understood why. The one that treated every unknown as a loaded threat until proven otherwise. That brain saved the human species. There is no question about that. Without it, we would not be here. The problem is that brain is still inside you right now, operating with the exact same rules, the exact same threat responses, the exact same black and white survival logic, in a world that looks nothing like the one it was built for. The environment changed completely. The hardware never did. And this is the part that genuinely shook me when I first understood it. We spend so much energy blaming ourselves for being lazy, for being afraid, for being stuck. We build entire identities around our failures to move forward, never once considering that we might not be failing at all. We might just be running software that was never designed for the life we are trying to live. Software that is doing exactly what it was built to do, which is keep you in place, keep you predictable, keep you alive, even if alive means hollow, even if alive means small, even if alive means spending your one life never once finding out what you were actually capable of. That hollowness has a name. And more importantly, it has a way out. But first, you need to understand exactly how deep this program runs, because it does not just live in your big decisions, it lives in the small ones too. The ones you make before you even realize you are making them. And that is where things are about to get very uncomfortable. Your brain made a decision about this moment before you finished reading that last sentence, and you had zero say in it. That is not a metaphor. That is literal neuroscience. By the time your conscious mind registers anything, a signal has already fired, a chemical has already been released, a direction has already been chosen. You are not the driver you think you are. You are, more often than not, a passenger who has been convinced the steering wheel is real. Let me explain exactly what is happening inside you right now, because this is the part that changed everything for me when I finally understood it. At the base of your skull, where your spine meets your brain, there is a cluster of structures so ancient that sharks have them, lizards have them, birds have them. Everything with a nervous system and a will to survive has some version of this. Neuroscientists call it the brainstem complex, but the name does not matter as much as what it does. It processes information at a speed that your thinking mind cannot compete with. It does not use language. It does not use logic. It uses something older than both of those things. It uses pattern recognition built from millions of years of survival data. It asks one question and one question only. Is this situation familiar enough to be safe? If the answer is yes, you feel nothing unusual and move on. If the answer is no, even slightly, even for a fraction of a second, the alarm goes off. And that alarm does not whisper, it floods your entire system. Your heart rate spikes. Your palms get that faint, clammy feeling. Your vision narrows slightly, like someone is slowly pulling the edges of the frame inward. Your stomach tightens in a way that has no clear explanation. And all of this happens before you have formed a single coherent thought about the situation, before you have assessed anything, before you have decided anything. The assessment already happened somewhere you cannot access, and the verdict was already delivered, and your body is already responding to it. This is not anxiety. This is not weakness. This is ancient hardware executing a program that has not been updated in a very, very long time. I remember the first time I really felt this in a way I could not explain away. I was standing in a hallway before a conversation I had been avoiding for weeks. Nothing dangerous about that hallway. Nothing threatening about the person behind that door. But my body felt like I was about to step off a ledge. Dry mouth, a strange ringing quiet in my ears. The almost magnetic pull to just turn around and leave. And the fascinating, maddening thing was that I knew, consciously and clearly, that there was no real threat. I knew it. And yet every cell in my body was screaming otherwise. That gap between what I knew and what I felt, that is where this ancient system lives, right in that gap. And here is what makes it so difficult to deal with. The brainstem complex does not distinguish between the intensity of a threat and the type of a threat. It cannot. It was never designed to. A sharp, unexpected sound in a silent room, and the sound of your own name said in a cold tone by someone you respect, to this system, both of those register as a potential danger signal. Your body responds to both with the same chemistry, the same tightening, the same readiness to either push back or disappear. The scale might differ slightly, but the mechanism is identical. One system, one response, no exceptions. And once you see that, you cannot look at human behavior the same way again. Now take that knowledge and carry it forward with me, because here is where it stops being just fascinating and starts being deeply, personally relevant to your life. We talked about that hollow feeling, that sense of being stuck in a life that fits like a shirt that is slightly the wrong size. Not unbearable, just never quite right. And we traced it back to this ancient system doing exactly what it was built to do. But I have not yet told you the full scope of the problem. Because the mismatch between this brain and the world we actually live in is not just uncomfortable. It is, in many ways, the central crisis of modern human existence. Think about the texture of a typical day. You wake up, and before you have fully opened your eyes, your phone has already delivered 17 pieces of information your nervous system now has to process. You sit in traffic or on a crowded train, surrounded by strangers, every one of them a mild, unknown variable to a system that categorizes unknown as caution. You walk into a workplace full of social dynamics, unspoken hierarchies, and invisible rules that your ancient brain is constantly scanning and mapping. You receive an email with a tone that is slightly off, and your stomach drops for 20 minutes over 4 sentences. You scroll through images of other people's lives and feel a faint but persistent signal that you are somehow behind, somehow lacking, somehow in a weaker position than you should be. None of that is a tiger. None of that is a genuine threat to your survival. But your brainstem complex does not know that. It is receiving a continuous stream of low-level alarm signals from morning to night, and it is responding to every single one of them with the same basic chemistry it would use if the danger were real. Which means that most people in the modern world are living in a state of near-constant low-grade survival mode. Not panicking, not collapsing, just permanently, subtly braced. Permanently slightly tense. Permanently spending a portion of their energy managing an alarm system that will not switch off because the world it was built for no longer exists, but the world we actually live in has somehow managed to be just threatening enough to keep it permanently switched on. And that exhaustion you feel at the end of a day where nothing particularly difficult happened. Now you know where it comes from. Every single dream you have ever abandoned left a fingerprint, and if you know where to look, they all point to the same 3 places. Not bad luck, not wrong timing, not the wrong circumstances. 3 specific responses that your ancient brain cycles through like a broken record, and between them, they have quietly swallowed more human potential than any external force in history. We already talked about what this system feels like from the inside. That tightening, that narrowing, that pull toward the exit. But now I want to go deeper, because feeling it is one thing. Recognizing it in your actual behavior, in the patterns of your real life, is something else entirely. And this part is going to be uncomfortable, because most people hear themselves in all 3. The first response is the one that looks the most like strength, but almost never is. It is the attack response. Not physical, almost never physical in modern life, but sharp, fast, and reflexive. You know this one. You have felt it as a sudden flare of irritation when someone questions a decision you made. You have felt it as that locked jaw, tight shoulder defensiveness when feedback lands in a way your system reads as a threat to your position. I used to think this response in me was passion. I told myself I cared deeply, that I had standards, that I simply did not tolerate mediocrity. And there was maybe a thread of truth in that. But underneath the story I was telling myself, the real driver was simpler and less flattering. Something felt unsafe. Something felt like a challenge to my territory, and my brain fired before I had a chance to think. The sharpness that came out of my mouth in those moments was not wisdom. It was an animal marking its ground. And here is the cost of that. Every unnecessary argument you have ever had because your tone shifted before your mind caught up. Every relationship that cooled slightly after one of those moments. Every room where you left an impression you did not actually intend. That was not you. That was the program running unchecked. The second response is the one most people are more willing to admit to, at least in private. It is the withdrawal response. The slow, almost invisible retreat. Not a dramatic exit, but a quiet erosion. You stop replying to that message about the opportunity because something about it makes your chest feel heavy. You start a new project with real energy, and then, somewhere around the point where it starts to feel real and exposed, you find yourself doing everything except the thing that matters. Reorganizing instead of creating. Researching instead of starting. Planning the plan instead of executing it. I had a period in my life where I had 3 different notebooks full of ideas I had never acted on. And I genuinely believed I was being thorough. I genuinely believed I was preparing. But what I was actually doing was finding the most sophisticated possible way to stay exactly where I was. The withdrawal response does not always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the right moment. But the right moment never comes, because that is not how this system works. It does not release you when conditions improve. It holds on tighter. The third response is the quietest and in many ways the most devastating: the freeze. Not procrastination, not avoidance, but a genuine paralysis, where you can see the path, you can feel the pull toward it, and your body simply will not move. It is like standing at the edge of a pool of cold water, knowing that once you are in it, you will be fine, but unable to make the physical step. There is a specific quality to this feeling that is hard to describe, but instantly recognizable once you know it. A kind of thick stillness, a sense of time passing around you while you stand motionless in the center of it. I have watched people I respect deeply, genuinely brilliant people, spend years in that frozen place. Not because they lacked ability, not because the opportunity was not there, but because the freeze had them, and they did not have a name for it, so they could not fight it. Now here is what I need you to sit with. Think back over the last few years of your life. Think about the things you did not do, the paths you did not take, the versions of yourself you almost became. And ask yourself honestly, which of these three responses was in the room with you in those moments? Because I would wager that if you trace any significant regret back far enough, you will find one of them waiting at the source. Not a character flaw, not fate, a biological program doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is keep you in place, keep you known, keep you in the territory it recognizes as safe. And this is the part that should make you angry, not at yourself, at the situation. Because you have been working against yourself without knowing it, and you have been calling it your personality. So now the real question arrives. If the system wants stillness, and the life you actually want requires movement, how do you break the stalemate? And the answer starts somewhere most people would never think to look. The system does not just want you to stay still. It wants you to stay in a specific kind of still. Predictable, enclosed, familiar. And it turns out that it has a very particular relationship with comfort that goes much deeper than most people realize. Because comfort, the way your ancient brain experiences it, is not about pleasure at all. It is about recognition. It is about the feeling of knowing exactly what comes next. And once you understand that, you start to see something disturbing about the life most people are actually living. Think about the last time you genuinely changed something significant in your life. Not rearranged the furniture, but actually changed the direction you were moving. For most people, that moment is surprisingly rare. And when they do manage it, there is almost always a point in the process where everything in them screams to reverse course, even when the change is clearly positive, even when every logical signal says this is right. That scream is the system. And it is not responding to whether the change is good or bad. It is responding to the fact that it is change at all. I know a man, someone I spent a lot of time with in a period of my own life where I was trying to understand all of this, who left a career that was genuinely making him miserable. He had planned it for 2 years. He had savings. He had a clear direction. He had every rational reason to feel relief the moment he walked out. And instead, he spent the following 3 months in a state of constant, low-level dread that he could not explain and could not shake. Not because anything was wrong, but because his brain had spent years mapping that miserable job as the known quantity, the territory, the familiar signal that meant he was still alive and still accounted for. The misery was familiar. The new path was not. And to the ancient system, familiar misery will always feel safer than unfamiliar possibility. That is not a personality quirk. That is not weakness. That is a feature of the hardware. And here is what makes it genuinely sinister. The longer you stay in a situation, any situation, the more your brain encodes it as the baseline. the more it reinforces the neural pathways that say this is normal, this is known, this is safe. Which means the longer you wait to change something, the harder it biologically becomes to change it. Not emotionally harder, biologically harder. The cage builds itself thicker with every day you spend inside it, and the lock does not need a key because you stopped looking for the door. And the most painful part of all of this is that the people who are most trapped are often the ones who are most convinced they have made peace with their situation. They have stopped calling it a cage. They have started calling it a choice. And the system rewards them for that reframing with just enough comfort, just enough predictability, just enough of that familiar low hum of known territory to make staying feel like wisdom. But somewhere underneath that quiet, something still knows, something still feels the distance between the life being lived and the life that was possible. And that distance does not disappear with time, it just goes quieter, until something cracks it open again. And when it does, the question is whether you are ready to look at what is on the other side of it. Someone figured out how your brain works before you did, and they built an entire world around that knowledge, and they never once planned to tell you about it. I want you to hold everything we have talked about so far and look at it from a different angle. Because up until now, we have been talking about this ancient system as though it is purely an internal problem, a glitch in your personal hardware, something between you and your own potential. And that is true, it is all of that. But there is another layer to this that is darker and more deliberate, and once you see it, the exhaustion you feel at the end of a day where nothing particularly bad happened starts to make a very different kind of sense. We established that your brainstem complex cannot distinguish between a real physical threat and a perceived social one. We established that it fires the same chemistry for both. We established that in the modern world, it is essentially running on overdrive because the environment delivers a constant low-level stream of alarm signals that never fully resolve. Now here is the question I want you to sit with. What if that stream is not accidental? What if the volume of that alarm is not just an unfortunate side effect of modern life, but something that serves a very specific purpose for very specific people? Fear, when it is sustained and low-grade and sourceless, does something very particular to human cognition. It narrows focus. It shortens the planning horizon. It makes the immediate feel urgent and the long-term feel abstract and unreachable. A person in that state does not zoom out and ask large, uncomfortable questions about the systems they are living inside. They manage, they cope, they get through the day. They look for small reliefs, small comforts, small certainties in an uncertain stream. And they become, without ever choosing to, extraordinarily easy to direct. I remember sitting with this realization for the first time and feeling something shift in my chest. Not panic, but a kind of cold clarity, like when your eyes adjust in a dark room and suddenly the shapes that were formless start to have edges. I had spent years feeling vaguely anxious without a clear cause and assuming the problem was somewhere inside me, some deficiency, some weakness I needed to work on. And the idea that the anxiety itself might be, at least in part, a delivered product, something constructed and maintained from the outside, that was not a comfortable thought. But it was an honest one. The mechanism is not complicated once you see it. A mind that is calm, rested, and not scanning for threats is a mind that is capable of independent evaluation. It can look at a situation and ask whether the story it is being told about that situation is actually true. It can sit with ambiguity without needing to resolve it immediately into something safe and familiar. It can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing long enough to actually find out. But a mind that is running on sustained, low-grade alarm cannot do any of that. It needs resolution. It needs certainty. It needs something or someone to tell it what is safe and what is not, what to trust and what to fear, where to stand and what to think. And the moment a mind is in that state, it is available. Available to whoever shows up with the most confident answer. That is the crack in the door. And there are industries, systems, and structures that have spent a very long time learning exactly how to walk through it. Now, I want to be precise here, because this is the part where it is easy to slide into a version of thinking that is itself a trap. I am not talking about a single coordinated hidden hand pulling levers from some back room. The reality is both simpler and more unsettling than that. It is not a conspiracy. It is an ecosystem. It is thousands of separate actors, each following their own logic and their own incentives, who have all independently discovered the same foundational truth: that a person in a mild state of fear is more responsive, more dependent, more willing to trade autonomy for the feeling of security. And once you discover that truth, whether you are running a media organization or a product line or a political platform, the temptation to use it is apparently irresistible. And the most efficient way to keep that mild fear running is to never let it fully resolve. To always leave the threat slightly open, slightly unfinished. Because a fear that resolves stops being useful. But a fear that sits at the edge of resolution, that is always almost answered but never quite, that kind of fear keeps a person coming back, keeps them attentive, keeps them looking to the same source for the update that will finally make them feel safe. And the update never fully comes. That is not an accident. That is the design. By the time I had mapped this out clearly in my own thinking, I started noticing it everywhere. In the rhythm of news cycles that always end on an unresolved note. In the architecture of certain conversations that leave you feeling vaguely worse about the world without giving you anything useful to do about it. In the specific emotional texture of advertising that does not sell you a product so much as it sells you a brief relief from a discomfort it quietly installed in you first. The discomfort of not being enough, not being secure enough, healthy enough, attractive enough, prepared enough. The product is the resolution. The fear is the setup. And the setup was never accidental. But here is where the next layer opens. Because knowing this is one thing. Being able to actually navigate it, to move through a world that is partly designed to keep your alarm system running without either becoming paranoid or becoming passive, that requires something specific. Something that most people have never been taught, and most systems have very little interest in teaching. And that is exactly where we are going next. The single most powerful thing you can do for your mind costs nothing, takes less than a second, and almost nobody does it. And I do not mean that as a motivational line. I mean it literally and precisely. Because what I am about to describe is not a technique you learn in a weekend seminar. It is a fundamental shift in the relationship between you and your own reactions. And once you make it, the entire architecture of everything we have been talking about starts to crack open from the inside. We ended in a place that could feel heavy. The idea that the world around you has been partly shaped to keep your alarm system running. That the anxiety you carry is not entirely self-generated, but is, in part, a delivered condition. And I want to be clear about something before we go further. Knowing that is not a reason to feel powerless. It is actually the opposite. Because the moment you understand that a significant portion of your fear was handed to you from the outside, you gain something you did not have before. You gain the right to question it. And questioning it is where everything begins. Here is the practice. Not the full version yet, just the seed of it. The next time you feel that familiar tightening, that chest-heavy, slightly breathless signal that your system is reading something as a threat, instead of moving with it immediately, you pause, just for a moment. Not to analyze, not to reason your way out of it, but simply to ask one question with genuine curiosity. Is this mine? Not is this real, not is this logical, just is this mine? Did this feeling originate inside my actual experience of my actual life? Or did it arrive from somewhere else, carried in by a headline, a conversation, an image, a tone of voice that was designed to land exactly this way? I started doing this during a period when I noticed I was waking up with a low, dull tension in my shoulders before I had even looked at my phone. A kind of preemptive bracing. And when I actually stopped and traced it, I realized that the tension had become conditioned. My body had learned to expect the incoming stream of low-grade alarm signals so reliably that it was beginning to prepare for them before they arrived. My nervous system was preloading fear. And the moment I saw that clearly, something genuinely shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way light shifts in a room when someone opens a window that has been painted shut for a long time. Just a crack, just enough to feel the difference in the air. That question, "Is this mine?" is not a magic fix. It does not dissolve fear. It does not rewrite your biology overnight. What it does is insert a gap. And that gap, even a tiny one, even a half-second pause between the signal and the response, is the most important real estate in your entire inner life. Because everything that is possible for you lives in that gap. Every choice that is actually a choice and not just a reaction. Every moment where you get to be the author of your behavior rather than its passenger. It all starts there, in that pause, in that one honest question asked before the wave takes you. The reason most people never develop this skill is not because it is difficult in the way that learning a language is difficult. It is difficult in the way that honesty is difficult. Because asking whether a fear is truly yours requires you to be willing to find out that you have been living inside someone else's anxiety for years, and that is an uncomfortable thing to discover. It means looking at choices you made, directions you avoided, things you believed, and asking how much of that was genuinely you and how much was the accumulated weight of signals you absorbed without realizing you had a choice about whether to absorb them. That audit is not easy, but it is the beginning of something that nothing else can give you. Now, from that foundation, from that first crack of awareness, the next layer of the work begins. And this is where it stops being about observation and starts being about action. The ancient system in your brain learns through one thing above everything else: consequence. It does not respond to insight. It does not update because you read something or watched something or had a meaningful conversation that shifted your perspective. It updates when the body has a repeated experience of moving toward the unknown and surviving. Not thriving necessarily, just surviving. Because to the primitive system, survival is the only data point that matters. And every time you move towards something that feels uncertain and come out the other side intact, you are writing a new entry in that survival database. You are teaching the oldest part of your brain something it has never been taught before, that forward is not the same as danger. This is why the actual practice of overriding the system has to be physical and has to be repeated. Not motivational, not inspirational. Physical and repeated. And it starts smaller than you think it needs to start. Because the system does not scale well to grand gestures. You cannot override years of conditioned retreat with one dramatic leap. But you can override it with a consistent sequence of small, deliberate forward movements that accumulate over time into a fundamentally different relationship between you and the feeling of uncertainty. I want to give you a specific image for what this looks like in practice. Think of a path through an overgrown field. The first time you walk it, every step requires effort. The grass pushes back, the ground is uneven. Your body is using extra energy just to navigate. But the second time you walk that path, it is slightly easier. The third time, easier still. Not because the field changed, because you changed it by moving through it. The neural pathway that corresponds to forward movement under discomfort works exactly the same way. The first override is hard. The 10th is noticeably easier. The 50th feels almost natural, and by the 100th, the system has genuinely begun to update. The alarm still fires, but quieter. The pull to retreat is still there, but weaker. And the gap between stimulus and response, that precious gap we talked about, grows wider with every repetition. The key that most people miss is that the action does not have to be large to count as data. Standing up and starting a task when your body wants to stay still. Sending a message you have been sitting on. Staying in a difficult conversation an extra 2 minutes past the point where the freeze wants to set in. These are not small things dressed up as small things. They are rewiring events. Each one is a vote cast in a new direction, and the system, ancient as it is still capable of learning. It just needs the evidence. And the only way to give it the evidence is to move. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, just forward, just enough, just one more time than yesterday. And that momentum, once it begins to build, does something unexpected. Something that goes beyond habit formation and beyond comfort zone expansion. It starts to change the way you see yourself, not because you talked yourself into a new self-image, but because your behavior has genuinely changed, and your brain, Even the ancient part recognizes the person who acts differently as a different kind of creature than the one who retreats. And that recognition is the beginning of something much larger than a better morning routine. It is the beginning of a different identity. And that is where the real transformation lives. Not in the dramatic moment of decision, but in the quiet accumulation of days where you chose differently. One gap, one pause, one step forward, and then another, and then another. Until the person who needed permission to move forward is simply no longer the person doing the moving. But here is what nobody tells you about that process. It does not stay comfortable just because you are making progress. In fact, there is a specific point in this work where things get harder before they get easier. And most people, right at that point, make a mistake that sends them all the way back to the beginning. And that is exactly where we are going next. The moment you start making real progress is exactly when your brain will try hardest to destroy it. And most people never see it coming. This is the part nobody warns you about. You do the work, you start moving, you build the small daily overrides we talked about, the forward steps, the pauses, the honest questions. And for a while, it feels like something is genuinely shifting. The mornings feel slightly lighter. The reflexive retreats happen a little less. You start to recognize the alarm signal before it fully takes you over. And then, often without any obvious external trigger, everything tightens again. The old pull comes back stronger than before. The anxiety that had been quieting suddenly spikes. And if you do not understand why this happens, you will do what almost everyone does at this point. You will interpret it as evidence that the work is not real, that you have not actually changed, that the system has won, and you will stop. But here is what is actually happening in that moment. The ancient system does not give up its authority quietly. When it detects that its patterns are being disrupted, that the familiar loops of retreat and avoidance are being interrupted more and more consistently, it does not simply adapt. It escalates. It sends stronger signals. It manufactures more vivid discomfort. It pulls older, deeper fears out of storage and runs them at higher volume. Not because you are failing, because you are succeeding. The resistance spike is not a sign that the door is locked. It is the sound of the lock straining because someone is finally turning the handle. I went through this myself at a point when I had been doing the daily override work for close to 3 months. Things had genuinely changed. I was moving through situations that would have previously frozen me. I was sitting with discomfort in a way that felt almost familiar, almost manageable. And then one week, for no clear reason, everything felt wrong again. A deep, sourceless unease that settled into my chest like cold fog. A pull back toward every old habit, every old avoidance, every old story about why the risk was not worth taking. And I nearly listened to it. I nearly called it wisdom. I nearly decided that the shift I had felt was temporary and the reset was the truth. What stopped me was not willpower. It was understanding. I had read enough, sat with enough of my own experience by that point, to recognize the pattern for what it was. A last push. A biological negotiation. The system making its strongest case for the familiar before it begins to genuinely accept the new territory. And the only response that works at that moment is to do nothing dramatic. Not to push harder. Not to white-knuckle through it. Just to continue. To keep making the same small forward choices at the same quiet pace. To refuse to interpret the discomfort as information about the direction and treat it only as information about the process. That is the crucial distinction. Discomfort that comes from moving forward is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that the system is being updated. And the update process is not comfortable. It is not supposed to be. You are rewriting patterns that have been running for years, in some cases for decades, and the process has a texture to it. It feels like resistance. It feels like friction. It feels like everything in you is pulling against the direction you are trying to move. And that feeling, that specific quality of inner friction, is the closest thing there is to a physical sensation of genuine change. So the reprogramming is not about eliminating that friction. It is about learning to read it correctly, to feel it and think, good, something is actually shifting here, rather than feel it and think, I should stop. And the tool that makes that shift in interpretation possible is not more action. It is something quieter, something most people in a results-driven world deeply undervalue. It is the ability to simply observe your own inner state without immediately acting on it, to watch the feeling rise without becoming the feeling, to notice the impulse without obeying it. And that ability has a name and a practice, and it is the thing that separates people who sustain real change from people who cycle back to the start every time the resistance spikes. The practice is stillness, not the passive kind, not the kind where you sit and wait for the discomfort to pass. Active stillness, the deliberate choice to be present with your own inner weather without trying to change it, fix it, or escape it. You sit, you feel what is there. The tightness in the chest, the low hum of unease, the pull toward the familiar. And you watch it, the way you would watch clouds moving across a sky, with genuine interest, without judgment, without urgency, just watching. The first time I did this properly, and I say properly because I had tried versions of it before that were really just dressed-up avoidance, I was sitting in a room that smelled faintly of old paper and wood, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, and I just let everything be there without moving. The anxiety I had been trying to manage for weeks was still present. I did not push it away. I did not analyze it. I did not try to trace it back to its source or reason my way past it. I just let it sit in the room with me, and I watched it. And something extraordinary happened that I was not expecting. It moved, not disappeared, moved, shifted, changed shape slightly. Because the thing about inner states, even very powerful ones, is that they are not static. They only feel permanent when you are running from them. The moment you stop and face them directly, they reveal themselves as fluid, as temporary, as things that pass. That discovery is not small. It is actually one of the most important things a person can learn about themselves. That you can be in the presence of fear, of discomfort, of the full weight of the alarm signal, and not be controlled by it. That you can hold it without it holding you. And every time you practice that, every time you choose active presence over reactive escape, you are building something that no external circumstance can take away. You are building the capacity to be with yourself fully, to be an honest witness to your own inner life without needing it to be different than it is in this moment. And from that place, from that quality of grounded presence, the choices you make stop being reactions and start being something else entirely. Something that feels, for the first time in a long time, like it actually belongs to you. But here is what this practice eventually reveals about the people who have mastered it at the deepest level. Because there are people who have taken this further than most of us will in a lifetime. And what they found on the other side of it is not what most people expect. It is not peace in the way we usually imagine peace. It is something sharper, something far more useful, and that is exactly what comes next. The people who have mastered their inner world at the deepest level are not the ones you would expect, and what they discovered on the other side of that work is almost nothing like what gets sold to you in the self-improvement space. We left off at a point where the practice of active stillness had revealed something important. That fear, when you stop running from it, is not a wall. It is a door. But what is on the other side of that door is the question, and to answer it honestly, I need to take you somewhere specific. Not to a theory, to real people who walk this path all the way to its end. I want to tell you about 3 very different individuals whose stories I spent a long time studying, not because they were famous in the conventional sense, but because each of them demonstrated something about the mastered mind that no textbook had ever made fully clear to me. And what connects them across completely different lives and completely different contexts is not what they achieved. It is how they moved. How they carried themselves through pressure, uncertainty, and loss in a way that had a specific quality to it. a quality that, once you have done enough of your own inner work, you can recognize immediately when you encounter it in someone else. The first was a man who had spent years in some of the most psychologically demanding environments a person can occupy. Not physically dangerous in the way that gets glorified, but the kind of environment where the pressure is invisible and relentless, where every decision is watched, every reaction is read, and any sign of inner instability is immediately sensed and used by the people around you. He told me once that the single shift that changed everything for him was not a strategy or a skill. It was the moment he stopped being afraid of his own discomfort, not the moment he eliminated the discomfort. The moment he stopped being afraid of it. And from that point forward, nothing anyone could do to him from the outside had the same leverage it once had. Because the leverage only ever worked through the fear. Remove the fear of the feeling, and the lever has nothing to push against. The second was a woman who had rebuilt her life after a period of complete collapse. Not a dramatic single event, but the slow, grinding kind of collapse, where everything that once defined you stops working at the same time, and you are left in a silence that has nothing familiar in it. She described the early part of her rebuilding process in terms I have never forgotten. She said it felt like learning to walk on a floor that might not hold her weight. Every step a conscious act of trust in a direction she could not fully see. And the thing that kept her moving was not optimism. It was not positive thinking. It was a single decision she made every morning to act as though the floor was solid, even when she could not feel it beneath her. That decision, repeated every day, eventually created something she had not had before. Not certainty, but the deep, earned confidence that comes from having moved through uncertainty enough times to know that you can. That is a different thing entirely from being told you are capable. That is a thing you build with your own hands, one day at a time, one forward step at a time. The third was someone I knew personally, a quiet man who rarely spoke about any of this directly, but whose presence had a quality that I noticed long before I had the language to describe it. He was not unaffected by difficulty. He was not cold or detached. In fact, he was one of the most genuinely present people I have ever spent time with. But when something went wrong, when pressure arrived, when the situation turned uncertain, there was a stillness in him that did not come from distance. It came from groundedness, from a relationship with his own inner state so well developed that external turbulence could move through him without uprooting him. Like a tree in wind, the branches move, the roots hold. And watching him navigate situations that would have sent me into immediate reactive mode was, more than any book or conversation, the thing that made me understand what this work is actually pointing toward. Not a person who feels less, a person who feels fully and is not swept away by what they feel. What all three of these people had in common was not a technique. It was a relationship, a specific, cultivated, deeply personal relationship with the oldest part of themselves. They had not silenced the ancient system. They had not transcended it or risen above it in some spiritual sense. They had simply learned to be in honest dialogue with it, to hear its signals without treating them as commands, to respect the information without obeying the panic. And that relationship had been built exactly the way we have been describing, slowly, physically, through repeated small acts of choosing presence over retreat, through the daily practice of sitting with discomfort long enough to learn its texture, through asking over and over, "Is this mine?" and being honest about the answer. And here is what that relationship eventually produces. Something that is genuinely rare and genuinely unmistakable. A person who does not need the situation to be comfortable in order to act well within it. A person whose quality of response does not depend on the quality of the circumstances. That is not a personality trait you are born with. That is a thing you construct, deliberately, patiently, over a long enough period of consistent inner work that the construction becomes structural, becomes the foundation rather than the effort. And once it is the foundation, everything built on top of it has a solidity that nothing built on unexamined fear ever achieves. Now we arrive at the end of everything we have covered, and I want to bring it together not as a summary, but as a single clear image that holds the whole of it. Imagine that you have been living in a house your entire life. The house is familiar. You know every room, every creak in the floor, every place where the light falls wrong. And in the basement of that house, there is an old system, pipes and wiring installed long before you were born, that controls the temperature of every room. You have never seen it directly, but you have always felt its effects. Sometimes the heat is too high and you cannot think clearly. Sometimes everything goes cold and you cannot move. And all your life you assumed that this system was fixed, that it was simply the nature of the house, that the temperature was something that happened to you rather than something you could adjust. What everything we have talked about amounts to is this. You can go into the basement. Not to destroy the system, it is structural, it keeps the house running, you need it. But to understand it well enough that you stop being its passenger and start being something closer to its engineer. You learn where the controls are, you learn what signals mean what. You learn to feel the temperature shifting before it becomes extreme, and to make small adjustments before the whole house swings to an unlivable extreme. And over time, the house stops running you. You start running the house. That shift, from passenger to engineer of your own inner life, is not a destination you arrive at once and stay at forever. It is a practice that you return to every day. Some days you do it well. Some days the system runs hot before you catch it. Some days you freeze before you remember to pause and ask the question. That is not failure, that is the work. The work is not achieving a permanent state of mastery. The work is choosing, again and again, to be the person who goes back into the basement rather than the person who stays upstairs pretending the system does not exist. And here's the truth that took me longer to accept than anything else in this entire journey. The people who live most fully are not the people who feel the least fear. They are the people who have developed the most honest relationship with the fear they feel. They have looked at the oldest part of themselves without flinching and said, "I see you. I understand what you are doing, and I am going to move forward anyway." That sentence, spoken inwardly with genuine conviction, is the closest thing to real freedom that I have ever found. Now I want to ask you something directly. Think about the last time the ancient system in you made a decision before you could. Think about the thing you did not do, the direction you did not take, the version of yourself that almost existed. And tell me honestly in the comments. What would your life look like right now if the fear had not been the one driving? Not the idealized version, the honest one. Because that gap between where you are and where that answer lives, that is not a judgment. That is a compass. And the only question that actually matters is what you decide to do with it starting today. If this reached something real in you, if it shifted even one thing in how you see yourself or the world you are moving through, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it means this kind of conversation keeps going.